following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, we're revisiting a topic that we touched on a few weeks ago: pathological narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. Ross Rosenberg, the original expert I had on for that show, has graciously returned to answer questions based on feedback I got after that first show, because I ain't touching this topic without an expert. I knew that when I decided to tackle the subject of narcissism, like pathological personality disorder narcissism, that this was a uniquely trendy topic. There's a lot of content on social media, notably TikTok, about narcissists and narcissistic abuse. I also knew that a lot of that content was junk, which is why I needed someone who was an expert in the field, who was also, one, willing to come and talk to the media, very hard to find, and two, good at it. Now, to say the interest in Ross's appearance was unusually eager is putting it lightly. It proved my suspicions correct that people want real information on this subject. What I hadn't encountered before the feedback from the last episode was the truly dark side of the discourse. You heard the air quotes on the discourse out there, where people will actively attack you for what they think you mean on this subject instead of what you actually say. In hindsight, that probably shouldn't have been surprising, considering that paranoia is a way that the inability to handle criticism manifests in some, I repeat, some people with pathological narcissism. I was also taken aback by the way language worked, specifically the intense gatekeeping regarding the use of the word narcissism. The fact that antisocial personality disorder is another cluster B disorder like narcissistic personality disorder, that fact doesn't stop the term antisocial from being used colloquially. We don't ban the word avoidant from discussions of, say, attachment styles because of the existence of avoidant personality disorder, a cluster C personality disorder. We do not talk about cluster A and cluster C nearly as much as, there's a fascination with cluster B. But numerous people insisted that unless someone is a doctor, like with a medical degree or a PhD of some kind, unless you are a doctor, these people claim, you are not allowed to use the word narcissist or narcissism in any way. And you're not allowed to identify narcissistic traits. And yes, policing speech to this extent doesn't tend to be a winning strategy, which is a big reason why I was stunned that people who seemed to mean well would even try. I even had people accuse me of claiming that BPD was the good cluster B personality disorder because of the reality that people with the classic form of BPD are, unlike people with narcissistic or antisocial personality disorder, more likely to be the victims of abuse than the perpetrators. That is not my opinion. That is just a fact. And yes, I see the irony of people with histrionic personality disorder being totally left out of the standard cluster B discussion, seeing as histrionic personality disorder is marked by an overwhelming need for attention. But yeah, the activist class in mental health really isn't helping here. And there's nothing we can do about that, but continue to present the facts. Now, here's the thing about facts on issues of mental health. They're challenging, in part because conditions like borderline personality disorder manifest, display in like 100 different ways. I've seen as much as 256 different ways. Even narcissism has the covert, the grandiose, the communal kind. I'm forgetting the fourth subtype, but this is why I brought Ross Rosenberg back. Ross has an ability, not only is he trained on this stuff, like really trained, but he's able to explain the issues to regular people. So after the break, I'm going to read him a list of the things I've been told about narcissism since the program he was on aired to get his expert opinion to see if we can clear some of this stuff up. Questions, comments, any feedback, concerns, Leanna at nottherapyshow.com, at nottherapyshow on social media. The myths and truths about pathological narcissism when we come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We have returning guests. Super stoked, guys. Super excited. You loved him the first time, so he's back. Ross Rosenberg is back of the Self-Love Recovery Institute. Practicing psychotherapist, is taking clients. If you like what you see, we're talking about myths about narcissists. Ross, welcome back. People love you.
Oh, that's so good. I kind of grew up thinking no one did.
Yeah.
Now all my problems are gone. No, actually, it's really nice to hear when people resonate with my material and it helps their life. I never get tired of hearing that. So thank you for letting me know that.
Yeah, good, because it stimulated a lot of discussion. A lot of it was very positive. A lot of people felt somebody gets it. But then there was, of course, the other side where there's a lot of myths. And I had no idea before we did the last show how many myths are out there. I mean, articles about things narcissists say. And
There's a lot of bullshit out there.
yeah, but this is stuff written by therapists. And so I wanted to have you back to touch on some of the things that came up in
hmm
discussion. Because one of the things, I had a lot of people with NPD in their bios on social media coming at me, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So, what
Ooh.
do you believe is one of or the biggest myth about working with narcissists, codependents, the kind of work you do?
Oh, that is a really general question.
Yeah.
One of the biggest myths is that it's doable and there's a decent probability of success. If your client is diagnosed in one of what I call the three pathological narcissistic disorders, which includes narcissistic, borderline, and antisocial personality disorders, the probability that you're going to have a positive outcome um, is very low. And if you're going to have a positive outcome, you're going to need to be a specialized therapist with specialized training, and that therapy is going to have to be intense and and it's going to take a long time. Um,
Yeah.
because therapists are like everyone else. They need jobs.
Yeah.
And how a therapist gets paid is by their psychotherapy sessions and how many clients they have. And so and some therapists will take on everyone
Yeah.
because maybe they don't have a choice because of the way their practice is set up. But it is very hard to help a person with narcissistic personality disorder in meaningful and um, constructive ways. It's often dangerous unless you're the type of therapist that just believes in superficial services of listening and empathy and positive statements, which I don't think is therapy, but unfortunately, many people mistake that as therapy.
Yeah. Okay. So that leads me in beautifully to one of the things that, because even within among therapists, there's this argument of definitions, right? Whether all people
Hmm.
diagnosed with BPD are true BPD cases. There's this weird thing about BPD, especially some people respond to treatment, some people don't. One of the theories is that's because they don't actually have BPD. The idea of diagnosis, one of the things people came at me really hard over is the idea that you need a degree to identify narcissistic behaviors. This was the argument I was given online. You have to
Right.
be a doctor to say that's a narcissistic trait. Is that true?
Okay, well, let's first differentiate a degree and doctor. Okay, so in my field, there's two types of doctors.
Right.
There's a psychiatrist who's a medical doctor who is largely focusing on mental health from a physical or physiological point of view. They're the ones that prescribe you medicine. And then there are psychologists, psychotherapists, and psychologists. Um, um, Parallel in many, many ways. But a psychotherapist cannot give testing, cannot interpret testing. That's where the psychologist that represents that extra 2 years of schooling.
Hmm.
So I'm going to change the question. You have to be a practicing, licensed um, mental health practitioner, psychotherapist, in order to diagnose.
Right.
And I will tell you that 75% of most psychotherapists uh, do not know how to diagnose. They are not taught that in grad school, and that is not a part of their practice. Um, it is a skill set that I accidentally ran into in the beginning of my career. It actually,
That's a
I
bit
was late.
scary that it was an accident.
Yeah, I was late in applying for an internship when I was at Boston University for my master's degree, and I wanted to get an internship in a counseling center because I was want to be a counselor, a
Sure.
psychotherapist. But instead, I got what was left over. It was a position for a psychologist, which I wasn't, in a mental health unit in a state psychiatric hospital
Okay.
for the acute, floridly mentally ill people. And so my job was to meet them, gather data, diagnose them. And so I had to learn all of this early on. And I used to complain to my supervisor, and he says, you know, Ross, you might not like it now, but later in your career, you're going to be happy about it. So, but back to the question. So if a psychotherapist is able to diagnose, they can, and those. So the problem is it's people who are not qualified. Qualified either as a psychotherapist are diagnosing, or qualified, they don't have a mental health master's level or beyond a degree.
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard people tell me that, a marriage counselor told them their partner was a narcissist. Their therapist told them their partner was a narcissist, that they were an abuser. And there's this huge debate about naming what happened to you as a victim.
Okay,
Now,
well, yeah, there's a huge debate about everything.
mhm,
If you're a psychotherapist, you have a master's degree, you have years of experience, you are able to make diagnostic statements, diagnostic conclusions. It is a part of our job, and we are trained to do that. Like I said, not all therapists have a lot of training and a lot of skills, and so shouldn't diagnose. But
fascinating.
if you're a marriage therapist,
Right.
and you are working with what I call someone with self-love deficit disorder or a codependent, the probability is extremely high, according to my human magnet syndrome theory, that their partner is going to have a personality disorder. And that's going to be narcissistic, borderline, or antisocial personality disorder. And always, not
Hmm.
sometimes, not 90% of the time, always marital therapy fails
Yeah.
if the partner has a personality disorder. So the best thing a marriage and family therapist can do to the partner, who is an SLD, partner of the pathological narcissist, is to say, you know, the reason this fell apart is your your partner has a personality disorder, um, and it's ethical.
Hmm.
What's not ethical is have those conversations with the SLD and continue the marriage therapy, because then then you are no longer objectively straddling the center. You you
Okay, that
you
makes
are
sense.
you are aligned um, with one client against the other. And so, but it is perfectly acceptable in the cases when marriage therapy falls apart, is to because you're allowed to do that.
Right.
You just can't do it in ways that go against conventional wisdom. You can't
Right.
continue the therapy while aligning with one client. But so people who have a problem with diagnosis, um, they're missing the point of the 6 or 8 years of their education. Um, we cannot treat problems if we don't know what they are. If you went to a physician and you had a cough that was not going away, you want to know what the heck is it and where's it coming from and what the treatment is.
Hmm.
You and you can't get treatment until the doctor figures out what it is.
That's right.
Um, and so in the medical field, diagnosis guides treatment. And that is essential. It's just you have to be a qualified diagnostician, and not a lot of therapists are. And there's like
That's mind
hundreds of
blowing.
thousands,
Yes.
hundreds of thousands of people on the internet, on the blog space, on YouTube, who are coaches who are diagnosing people. They
Yes.
should not be doing that.
Yes. Yeah. Now, the other side, I wasn't going to bring this up till later, but the idea that my therapist says you're this, that's always a red flag, isn't it? Like a
My th-
therapist diagnosing somebody that they haven't
wait,
talked
wait, wait,
to.
wait, wait, wait. So who are these people? So who is the person saying my therapist?
I was approached by I approached by a young woman on, I believe it was
Okay,
Blue Sky.
okay. Now I'm saying so
Yeah.
someone who
Had a
is in a relationship
partner.
with.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, who told them, my therapist says you're an emotional manipulator. That was specifically the claim. This therapist had never seen this woman, never talked to this woman, but her former partner said the therapist had diagnosed her in absentia. And I hear this a
Okay, so
lot.
okay, so when I find out okay, so I'm the type of therapist. I'm not your regular normal therapist. I've developed my own specialized, unique, personality-driven approach to it
Hmm.
all. And so I say what I think. I educate. I'm not passive, and I don't
Mm-mm.
believe in we have to somehow get the client to see it. Sometimes they don't. So I will say, it seems to me that your partner has this personality disorder or this, and it's not based upon what they're telling me, but based upon my conclusion of the facts given to me. If I find out from my client that they are telling their partner what I say, I threaten them with the termination of therapy. I said, you are using me you are triangulating me against your partner. And that is not only not helping you and you don't know it, but you're creating someone that could potentially be dangerous to me and my reputation. And most of them say, I'm sorry. And I said, well, here's the rule. This is what you can say. You can say what I'm learning in therapy. You can say whatever you want as long as you say what I'm learning in therapy, not what Ross says, because that then tells your narcissist this is about me judging them, and now I am a threat because I'm I'm controlling you like they want to control you.
That makes a lot of sense. And the triangulation element is what I thought it was. So good. Okay, let's go to a break, Ross, and come back and talk about some other myths involving narcissists and change. You good with that?
Absolutely. Let's
All
do it.
right, Ross Rosenberg of the Self Love Recovery Institute, great resource. Selfloverecovery.com. We are talking about myths about narcissists, questions, comments, any feedback whatsoever. Leanna at nottherapyshow.com or at nottherapyshow on social media. We will be back talking more myths about narcissists and the truth on It's Not Therapy. Following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back and It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking to returning listener favorite, Ross Rosenberg, who came on the show and talked about his Self-Love Recovery Institute, his self-love, what is it, Ross? Self-love deficit disorder? Is that right? SLDD?
Yes. Yeah. I changed the term codependency to self-love deficit disorder, or SLDD.
Which I love. I think it's a better term. Nobody knows what codependent means, right? It's a borrowing of a borrowing. But Ross is back. We're talking about myths about narcissism. And Ross, this question, this thing was actually why I reached out to you again to talk again, because it was something somebody told me. And it's like, this is, I think, totally the opposite of what Ross told me last time. But the idea that narcissists can change, they will change if they're given this loving, supportive, validating environment. Now, is this true?
No, that's a bunch of crap. Um, so you have to understand the nature of a personality disorder. There are 11 or so, and what ties them all together is the person with a personality disorder, such as narcissistic, borderline, and antisocial personality disorder. They don't believe they have a problem. They are unable to see, to imagine that they are the locus, the point of the problem in a relationship. They tend to see other people as causing them pain and discomfort, and they're the victim. So when you look at narcissists, someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, they are not going to see themselves as the perpetrator of the harm that the SLD, or the person with self-love deficit disorder, experiences. They can't see it. They can't acknowledge it. And if you push them, they'll get mad. They will get agitated and eventually have what we call a narcissistic injury, which then provokes anger, sometimes rage, and depending on the level of aggression of that person, that might be turn into punishment, turn into some form of control to make sure someone never says that to them again. And so they don't do well in therapy, and they're very difficult clients to have.
Now, is there, if they're highly, highly specialized, is there potential? My understanding is, tell me if this is right or wrong, it's the duration and intensity of the therapy, like you said before, as opposed to a particular treatment. So these
Okay,
people going through 12 weeks of DBT, that's not going to cut it, yeah?
okay. Well, it depends on the diagnosis.
Okay.
Although I refer to borderline antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders as one of the pathological narcissistic group, part of being of that group. They're all very different. So if you're a sociopath, you have antisocial personality disorder, therapy does not work and will never work. There is no scientific evidence out there, none, that shows that traditional psychotherapy has positive outcomes on ASPD. When it comes to borderline personality disorder, there are evidence that modalities such as dialectical behavioral treatment, DBT, works, and that requires someone to be in a program that practices that. You cannot be a DBT therapist. You have to be a DBT treatment provider within a larger organization that has other services and other people um, connected to the treatment process because
Okay.
the treatment of someone with borderline personality disorder is so inherently difficult that you have to be able to have other staff to help to be involved. So if you have borderline personality disorder, the probability to determine a positive outcome is based upon if you're in treatment. But most people with BPD are not in treatment. So the probability of success if you are in treatment is not high. It's probably less than 20%. But that
Because they
that
don't
number,
stick with it.
they don't stick with it.
Okay.
Something happens, they get mad, that they have borderline personality disorder. Um, um, but if you look, so if you look at percentages of all people with BPD getting better is very, very low because they
Yeah.
won't go to therapy and they won't stay in it. But DBT can work if that person sticks with it. It's just almost it's almost like a contradiction that the therapy itself is so threatening. So,
Yeah.
but it does work. With narcissistic personality disorder, there are also research proven modalities that can help, but it's the same thing. People with narcissistic personality disorder, more than people with BPD, don't think they have a problem and therefore don't seek therapy. And if they do seek therapy, they look for someone that will allow them to continue their version of being the victim. And if you're a therapist who doesn't have a clue, you just are listening to someone who just has a lot of problems. But the minute you start holding the client responsible for the harm that they're perpetrating against another person, the probability that you're going to lose them, they're going to quit therapy is very high. So the same thing, if you're in a program that treats narcissistic personality disorder, it's a very, very low probability that you're ever going to get into it. And and not a very high probability that you're going to stay there long enough to have a meaningful difference. There are very few people that I've met in my career, and I've been around for 40 years, that are pathological narcissists, borderline or narcissistic personality disorder, who have successfully completed a treatment program and no longer carry that diagnosis. I, and that means that even though it's not pure research, I've been around. I
Right,
talked to people.
right, right, right. Now that's mind blowing because it sounds like there's a lot of people out there taking people's money for stuff that doesn't work. They're selling false
Yeah,
hope.
okay, so when you say it that way, it looks like they're charlatans and fakes.
Okay,
So I'm gonna rephrase what you said
okay,
and hopefully say what you mean. There are a lot of people who don't know any better and think that they're
okay.
providing who are providing a qualified service to someone that's helpful. Um, that that is common. So if if you have narcissistic personality disorder and you love your therapist, it means you get to go in every week and complain about everything and explain why you're the victim and have a very empathetic therapist. And that is what they need. They just aren't able to deal with someone to hold them accountable. The therapist, if you're a very simple-minded therapist that believes that psychotherapy is just listening and support, which unfortunately is at least 50% of, I believe, most therapists, is that they think that is the bulk of what you're supposed to do. It's necessary for to do, but um, then you're seeing a client who really benefits from therapy because you don't have the context for what that person is like outside of therapy, what's going on outside in a relationship. So these are therapists that are operating in the dark. And then you got some unscrupulous, you know, unethical ones that you're referring to that know what they're doing, they don't care. That is the that is very, it's the minority of all psychotherapists.
Okay.
Most try hard, most want to do good, and most give it as much as they can. It's just what you don't know, you can't do.
Right. So it's ignorance, not malice.
Oh no, it's mostly ignorance.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
mostly, yeah, yeah. I haven't met a lot of psychotherapists that if you're a psychotherapist, it means that there was a point of time you were a codependent. You have SLDD. That's
I
how it is
wondered
start.
about that.
That's how it starts. So you want to help, you want to change the world, you want to make a difference. That's what brings us to the field. And it is born out of trauma in our childhood. And I address that in my Human Magnets in her books. But you want to do good. You want to make a difference.
Right.
Some get burnt out and they don't know how to spot that. And that's when they start losing their edge and start harming more people than helping.
How do you know if therapy is harming yourself or a loved one instead of helping?
How do you know if therapy is help? Um, if, okay, going back to diagnosis, if you have an idea of what the problem is and you can somehow qualify and quantify that, I okay, a person, and I'm speaking for some person I'm making up in my head. I'm going to therapy because I'm depressed. I'm going to therapy because I have low self-esteem. I'm going to therapy because, I haven't gotten over this trauma. Well, I mean, that in a perfect world should guide the therapy, and the positive outcome is the resolution of that. And so if you have a therapist who gets that and sees things like a medical doctor, diagnosis leads treatment, treatment goes to try to resolve the diagnosis, then you know when you've reached a successful
Okay.
outcome. And so back before I developed my self-love recovery treatment program, there were the outcome was when they didn't need me anymore.
Okay.
And I learned that early on. My success was when they didn't need me anymore, and that I should be able to recognize that and not be afraid of losing a client and losing money. And and that is, I think, one of the best moments. When that happens to me, that's like a wonderful moment. Just as long as all of them doesn't happen at the same time. Is,
Right.
is, and so it's very clear. People come in with a problem. Once you solve that problem, you've done your job. But if you're the type of therapist that isn't very, complicated and believe your job is just to listen and be supportive, well, you end up being like a mother or father figure. And that happens naturally. And we have this term transference and countertransference in our field where it naturally happens just because of the, the dynamics, the interplay between the profession and the clients we serve. But that's when I interview people for my self-love recovery treatment program, one of the areas I ask questions is about past psychotherapy. And when they say, I've been seeing this therapist for 5 years, 10 years, and I ask, well, how's it going? And they say, great. And I say, what reason were you seeing her or him for? And
Hmm.
have you solved it? And they said, well, not really. We just talk, da 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 da. Da.
I've heard this
And
a lot.
and then
Yeah.
I asked, then I said, it sounds almost like a friend. They go, yeah.
Yes.
And I said, and if I do accept them in the program, and I say, you're going to need to terminate that therapy because you should not, it's a general rule in the field,
Yeah.
you should not be going to two therapists at once. Not because one is better, but two therapists don't think alike. And if they get scared and they say, I don't want to hurt my therapist's feeling, well, that's a huge red flag
I hear
that
that a
they have.
lot. Yeah.
That is an unhealthy relationship. That is not good psychotherapy and could very well be a version of the codependent narcissist relationship.
I've
There
heard a
are
lot of
narcissists who are psychotherapists, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say they're afraid to bring up concerns with their therapist, and that, I mean, their entire article's written on it, right? Over and over and over again.
That's that
Yeah.
that that, that is that's a clear flag of a really clear indication of something really wrong. And and I explain that to my clients, and they see it someone explains you shouldn't, you know, be seeing someone who can't understand the problem and get you to the resolution of it. Um, and if the only friend you have is your therapist, then what your therapist should be working with you on is how to develop friends
Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
not be dependent on them.
I went through that when in the worst days
Yeah.
of the trauma. It was the go out and
Yeah.
make friends session for like 4 to 6 weeks in a row. Okay, so we're coming up on time. I've got two questions. Let's see if we can get both in.
Okay.
Um, all one thing I heard, and this threw me, is the idea that narcissism is rooted in trauma. Rooted, not trauma
Mhm.
is a risk factor, but rooted. That was the
Of course.
exact word from multiple people, both experts and lay
Uh,
people. Is that true?
yeah. Oh, it's a fact, of course. So, if you look at the crucible of the moment that psychological disorders are created, it's in childhood. It's during the attachment phase of a child. Children need unconditional love from parents in order to become healthy, productive adults. If you are lucky enough to have a normal parent, and by the way, parents make mistakes, and
Yes.
sometimes even in therapy, but you come out of childhood with self-love, and that because of the human magnet syndrome, you tend to fall in love with people that also have self-love. But if you come from a family where one of your parents is a pathological narcissist, which according to the human magnet syndrome theory, the other is a
Yes.
codependent or an SLD,
Right.
it means that your attachment experience as a child is only going to be somewhat positive if you can change yourself, mold yourself, and become the type of child the narcissist wants, and become, the friend, the
Mm-hmm.
good kid,
Mm-hmm.
the trophy child. And if you can mold yourself, that means you learned that love is to take care of someone else at the expense of yourself. And by the time you become an adult, your what I call the relationship template is set. So then you become an adult and you meet someone, the type of person that's going to feel safe and familiar is the one that needs a lot of help and you get to be silent about what you need. Now that's dysfunctional, but it happens unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
If you are the child in this same family that the narcissistic parent did not like, hated, who could not please him or her, you were considered the bad seed, the bad child. You not only were deprived of unconditional or conditional love, you were the recipient of abuse, neglect, deprivation. You grew up in this attachment phase in an extremely hostile environment. And that coalesces into a personality disorder. So at the core of all personality disorders, especially narcissistic and borderline and antisocial personality disorder, is a person who suffered egregious and tremendous psychological, physical, sexual trauma and had no resource to to save them, to protect them. So they were broken, so broken that by the time they were an adult, there was no cure because there's really no cure to personality disorders.
Right.
And so every person who has one of those three personality disorders have experienced extreme trauma as a child. Now, should we feel sorry for them? Well, I
Interpreted that
guess,
question. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I guess in a philosophical way, but we live in modern societies, Western cultures. We hold people responsible for their actions. If we wanted to forgive people for their hurtful actions because of their childhood trauma, we would be we would be letting 95% of people who are incarcerated out of prison.
Yeah, there's zero accountability if it's just, oh, you had trauma, you're not responsible for what you do.
So it happened, and happens. And so if you can solve it and get a good psychotherapist and be brave and courageous and perseverant, you can overcome it. But most of the narcissists don't, because of what we talked about before.
Right. Okay. Final question. You guided me there beautifully. One thing I heard from the advocates for people with NPD is that people fear narcissists mainly because of stigma. Is that true? Is there really no good reason to avoid people with these conditions?
Okay. So a stigma. Let's first understand what a stigma is. A
Right.
stigma is a bunch of beliefs about something that are based upon um, unsubstantiated information,
Right.
like someone with who's on the autistic, who's on the spectrum, they are bad people. They are this. Well, that's a stigma because autism people are kind of different, maybe a little bit strange, but they're not bad. Um, Stigmas against sexual preference, sexual orientation, stigmas against um, so many other um, um,
Well,
conditions that.
I get PTSD. She's dangerous. She's gonna go crazy.
Okay,
She's gonna go off on somebody someday. Yeah.
Well, so to me, that's not a stigma. That's ignorance.
Okay.
A stigma is much larger. It's like what society believes that someone. It's so if society believed that if you have PTSD, you're crazy or this or that. Well, you know, then having that disorder is a stigma.
Right.
That means you're going to be perceived as something bad,
Correct.
something negative. So, you know what? I got myself away from the question. Get me back to the
Yeah.
question.
The idea that the main reason or the reason people fear narcissists, pathological narcissists,
Okay.
is mainly because of stigma. It's not,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I see. I just don't see that as an accurate statement. Most people fear narcissists because of the harm that they cause. That, I mean, they are clear. I mean, unless you're a sociopath or a covert narcissist, they're pretty obvious. They're kind of there. They're grandiose. They're entitled. They're easy to spot. Um, People fear narcissists because of what they do to them or other people. Um, if you're a healthy individual and you've heard nasty things about narcissists, well, that's not necessarily a stigma. It's information that's important for you to know, because um, the information is accurate. They're self-centered, they're entitled, they're selfish, they're this, they're that, they're that. That's not a stigma. A stigma is explaining something in a negative light that should not be. Um, uh, so I don't think it's the stigma that makes people think badly of narcissists. I think it's living, breathing examples of narcissists that make people feel unsafe, and the actual treatment of that narcissist on another person.
All right, we are out of time. Ross Rosenberg. Guys, you got your questions answered. There you go. That's why we have a feedback system on this show. Selfloverecovery.com is Ross's website. Mental health professionals get a 20% discount on all of his
Mhm.
stuff. There's webinars, there's books, you can talk to it. You got like a 10-minute free consultation offered on there,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So
Mhm.
if you like what you heard, Ross, thank you so much. This was super informative. My mind is kind of blown.
Mhm.
This was a lot of high quality, dense information in 2 interview segments, 2.5. So thank you
Well,
so
thank you.
much for coming
Well,
on.
it's
Go
my
ahead.
pleasure, and I appreciate the excitement and energy you bring to it. So that really helped me out a lot. So thank you for that.
All right. NRG, questions, comments, any feedback. Leanna at nottherapyshow.com is my direct email. At nottherapyshow on all social media. Well, most social media. There's a new social media site being created every day. Anyway, final thoughts on this topic of myths and truths about pathological narcissism when we come back, and it's not therapy. The The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking about the myths and facts of clinical narcissism. And you may have noticed during that interview with Ross Rosenberg, that was pre-recorded a few weeks ago to work around his schedule. And my voice was a lot weaker in the interview, the pre-recorded interview, than it is now or at the beginning of the show. You are not imagining that. I do not want to gaslight you because, yeah, that was not your imagination. And gaslighting is where I want to go with the rest. Is I greatly appreciated Ross's nuance in his answers. He cut to the core of what I found off about some of the responses I got. Because sometimes factual information can be torqued to gaslight us out of what's best for us. And he identified a few of those without me leading him there, which I was very happy. That's a journalist dream, that when you don't have to ask the follow-up question. And now we are in the follow-up of why does this matter? And I'm going to take us back all the way back to the beginning where I talked about the gatekeeping of language. Because narcissistic abuse is a specific form of abuse rooted in, a cyclical love bombing and then devaluation, getting people to start seriously questioning whether their memory is reliable, whether their version of events is something that they can, hold on to. Maybe they're just the crazy one. Maybe they were wrong about everything. It is a unique kind of bizarre when someone is just lying and won't admit it. And you don't get that with people without very specific kinds of personality disorders. So it's important to call it what it is. And for people trying to overcome their self-love deficits, language is very important. There are a lot of people stuck in the pain of a past toxic relationship. And that's no good. But if calling something that feels right to you is a step towards healing, do it. Because not naming it something that feels right in your head, because people out there don't approve, that is still that other-oriented self-love deficit that we're trying to overcome. And I can't overcome the clock. Questions, comments, any feedback, Leanna at nottherapyshow.com, at nottherapyshow on social media. Another show down. Remember, you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you next time.